this is the Provoked Prawn, and I'm here to talk to you about the NZXT H9 Elite. This is a review video. I'm going to talk about the various different features of this case. Now, as you can see, I've set it up and built it in two different formats. One with NZXT's F120 RGB Duo fans, and then again with Corsair's AF120 RGB Elites. So quite different setups, and also you'll notice different radiator placement and other things. So I want to talk about my experiences with doing those two different builds, the logic behind doing it, and also the things that I discovered along the way and the things that I like and don't like about the case. Now, for the most part, this is going to be a favourable review because I really like it. It's a very nice case for a number of different reasons. Many will say it's very comparable with Lian Li's dynamic range. It looks kind of similar to the Dynamic Evo, for example. I don't think it's as flexible as that case, in my opinion. However, the build quality is superb, and this is definitely one of the best NZXT cases that I've seen in quite some time. You can see from multiple angles, it's really nice looking. It's also very roomy, and that's the biggest takeaway from it, is it's really roomy both for the front and the rear, giving you loads of easy build opportunities and loads of flexibility in what you do with it. It just made it really nice to build in, fantastically easy to set up, and it also is pretty decent setup as standard. So you can see that it comes included with 4 fans, 3 of which are the F120 RGB fans, and then you've got a single one which isn't, which is obviously a downside. But then at the rear you have these massive vented panels. Now NZXT sort of memed the airflow problems in the past, where the cases haven't been that amazing in terms of the airflow, but they've obviously gone all in and with the airflow, and you still manage to maintain a good aesthetic here as well. You'll see that the top panel, for example, has some glass on it, but it also has some airflow ports. It also has a removable fan tray. And by the way, I'm going to leave all the specs of what you can build in this case in the description. But basically, the top can take a 360mm radiator, as can the side and the bottom. So there's plenty of space in here as well, and obviously lots of flexibility in fan positioning. You'll also notice lots of different dust trays and access to be able to remove all the different panels and dust trays as well. So you should have good airflow, good aesthetics, and good quality. Now, at the end of the video, I'm going to show you a couple of benchmarks with comparisons between the two different setups that I've already shown you. So you'll see what it's like to side mount a radiator and to top mount, and the difference between those with the Corsair and NZXT setup, so you can get an idea of the thermal performance. Obviously, it's going to vary depending on what you're putting in there in terms of the processor, the GPU, and everything else, including the fans. But you can see that there's a lot of venting here and a ridiculously big dust tray in the rear as well that you can also take out. So you've got plenty of space to be able to clear this out. Also interesting because obviously you have the PSU at the back here and hard drives as well, potentially, and SSDs. So having a lot of decent airflow around the back here is pretty cool, and it's nice the way they've done this. It's interesting. Whether you actually need it in the middle part where the sort of cable's going to be and the SSDs as much as you would where the power supply unit is and the radiator or fans, well, it's questionable. Obviously, you have a removable hard disk drive caddy that can take up to 2 3.5-inch hard disk drives, so platter drives, or 2 2.5-inch SSDs. You also have that mounting tray through the middle, which is sort of doubles as a cable cover and a SSD tray, and I'll show you that in a second. So that thing can take 4 SSDs, so there's plenty of space for storage, as well as fans and obviously other things too. In the front of the case, when you take this box out, you'll find that there's a tray included, which basically swaps out with the top one. So the standard plastic panel that's mounted at the top allows you to mount 320mm fans on it. This one goes for 140, so 240s, or obviously you could choose between a 360mm radiator and a 280mm radiator instead, so you have some flexibility in how you set that up. Personally, I don't understand that. I think you'd be better off with 3 120mm fans or a 360mm rad at the top, but you have some flexibility there. And obviously, if you're putting in a custom loop system, potentially, then maybe you want some flexibility in what you're going to do or how you're going to set it up. You'll also see there's a cable tray, basically blocks out the cables that run on the right-hand side. And as standard, you have those RGB fans down the right-hand side set to intake, and then obviously that rear single fan set to exhaust. It's nice to see multiple fans included, especially RGB ones, so that's pretty neat. And you can see the removal of that SSD tray here. It's held in place with 2 screws, and then basically a couple of clips that allows you to easily move it. So obviously that hides away a lot of the cable shame, and we'll talk more about cable shame later on because I'm terrible at cable management. Also often leave it a mess on purpose just to demonstrate the fact that a case can handle it. And this case can handle it because there's a lot of room here. Also, when you remove this, you'll find that it comes included with its own fan controller. So this is a new version of NZXT fans controller, which can handle up to 9 fans, power, and 6 RGB. So you'll notice that there are some splitter cables in there where you can plug in 3 different cables into one of the fan ports. As standard, there's 3 fan ports, which can handle up to 9, as I said, if you've got 3 of those splitters, and then 6 RGB ports. So in theory, for the most part, for the easiest setup, you could put 6 fans onto this, but you could then also make use of other connectors. And I've done a video separately on the fans and how to set them up and the logic of them if you want to find out more about NZXT's standard RGB F120 fans. And so check that out, I'll link to it in the description. But you can see the removable tray here as well. So this side tray is removable with the fans installed as it was. And this was pretty interesting because it's actually quite flexible, because obviously you could leave that in as it is, leave those fans as intake, and then you can install your own fans. But you can also take it out, maybe think about positioning fans the other way, set them to exhaust perhaps, or installing a radiator on them. So that was the first thing that I wanted to try, because with Lee's cases, for example, I've often side mounted a radiator and seen that you can do push-pull setup on it and other things like that, or just to change the aesthetic, have a slightly different setup. I like to mount them this way because I think it looks neat. But the thing that I also found immediately was that you could mount the radiator to the back of this tray, which is pretty cool. Not only that, but you could also put extra fans on the rear and still have them fit in a position where you could shut the door. So yes, you could do a push-pull setup in this case, but also you could hide the radiator behind the case along with a set of fans and still have fans on the front of it as well. So you could have 6 fans on this radiator for enhanced cooling performance as an option. Now, as I said earlier, you can remove the hard disk drive bay if you don't want to use it, but there's some flexibility in there because there's a thumb screw to hold it in place. But if you want to, you can pop that in. And I think that you'll find that there's plenty of room to have this and multiple SSDs and a large power supply unit and that push-pull setup in there as well. And because you can see just how roomy it is. So this can handle up to an ATX motherboard. So this is an NZXT motherboard. Again, specs of the build and the case will be in the description, so you can find out about the setup for both versions of this build that I've done. But you can see here, this is an NZXT C1200 PSU, so it's a 1200 watt power supply unit at the rear, and you can see even with that installed, there's still plenty of space back there. Another note, obviously, the fan for the PSU is facing towards the rear, which will make the most of that massive vented panel that you saw earlier on. So plenty of airflow through the rear into that power supply unit and cooling performance. Now with the fans mounted to that top tray, you can obviously just slot that back into place. One of the things that I noted here is actually how much room you have for running the cables. There's obviously different options. I could have run them into the case and then through the holes at the top above the motherboard, but you can also just pop them here and run them through to the back as long as they're not pinched obviously by the top of the case. But it slots into the spot on either end and then is held down with thumb screws. But it means that you can hide a lot of the cable shame at the rear, so a lot of the fan cables can easily be sort of hidden away from view. I think there's a lot of thought and clever setup here that NZXT's done with the design of this case. I will note, however, that this fan tray is obviously made of plastic, as I said earlier on, so it kind of feels a bit flimsy, and it lets down some of the otherwise pretty good quality build that are filled from this case, so it's not as good as the rest of it, I didn't think, not as solid. Now, the SSD tray that I showed you earlier on obviously has the option to mount multiple SSDs in it. I'm showing the setup for one here, but they're really simply installed. And once you've installed them, they're also hidden away behind it. So you can see multiple different slots in here where you basically slide your SSD into it. And then when the panel's back in place, it just sort of covers over the wires and the drive itself. So you just slip it in, then use the included screws that come with the case to install them. Now I've done a full setup on this case with all the different steps for installing all the parts you've seen so far, which is a lot longer than this video, but if you want to find out more about that setup process, be sure to check out that video. I'll link to it in the description. But here you can see that final step, we're basically closing that down. You do need to, however, screw the tray down, which I thought was a bit of an annoyance. This is a minor point during the build process, but obviously you can see I've got a lot of cables going on here. we close that tray down. The shame of those cables is hidden away, which is nice. But once you've screwed that tray down, if you then find that you need to take out some cables to change some things, or maybe something's loose, you need to check the cable connections, you have to unscrew it again and take it back off. Minor point, but minor annoyance. And here's the final build product for the most part, with the fans installed. Obviously no GPU at this point, but what I wanted to show is from multiple angles the setup here. One thing that we all know, obviously, is standard rear fan, no RGB, which kind of takes away from the aesthetic. Again, you may want to buy another F120 RGB duo fan for this to finish off and make it look a bit nicer. Also, I only had 240mm fans for the bottom. I think 320mm will probably look a bit nicer as well. So think about how you're building and what you're doing in order to make it look good and make the most of the, obviously, glass panels. This is a 4080 from Zotac, and I obviously wanted to be able to demonstrate the size of the case in this way with a standard installation. The 40 series GPUs are known for being pretty chunky and large, so you can see that it's fitting in there fairly well. There's still quite a lot of room from the end of it to the end of the glass, and you might have the benefit of actually having some air blown onto it from those rear fans, depending on the setup as well. So still plenty of room there. The other option, though, as you've seen earlier on, is as well as the standard installation, you can also get a vertical mounting kit from NZXT. This is a PCIe Gen 4 kit, and it's really easy to set up and install as well. Basically a simple bracket, multiple screws. You take out all the back plates for the case, as the standard brackets would be for installing graphics cards and other things. Remove all of those, install this instead. Plug in this cable into your motherboard, into the top slot, slot the graphics card into it, screw everything down, and then you have a nicely positioned GPU which is set back from the glass enough that it should still run cool, and you maybe have the benefit of a better looking graphics card. Whether this harms performance, though, is questionable, because obviously you then don't have perhaps the same benefits in terms of airflow, because we're pulling cold air in from the bottom, and obviously that then has to bounce around in the case a bit more before it's sucked into the graphics card, whereas in a standard fitment the GPU is pulling air from below as well. However, you can see that the final product looks really nice. Now, I'm using a Kraken Z73 with obviously the RGB fans on it, side mounted as a reminder here, and this is the final setup and what it looks like. And as you can see, aesthetically very nice. Also, once it's set up in properly with NZXT cam, it runs really quietly and is pleasant on the eyes and on the ears, and I think the final aesthetic's really good. As you've seen, the build was really straightforward, and there was absolutely loads of room at the back for cables, drives, all sorts of things. I think the setup has been one of the most pleasurable I've had in some time. But obviously I wanted to test the performance, and I thought it'd be worth testing both these setups to show you the difference between them. So I ran Cinebench R23, and obviously I was recording at the same time. Now this is a Core i9 12900K running on NZXT motherboard. That CPU runs particularly hot. I actually had some problems with it when I first got it, when I was testing it with a different setup where it ran so hot it was basically thermal throttling, and I had to downvolt it in order to keep it cooler. So I want to note that before you see the final tests in terms of how hot it gets, because it still does run quite hot, and you'll see that in both formats, whether the radiator's top mounted or side mounted. Also, obviously, quite a different setup, different fans, different radiator, different GPU setup as well, so quite different. So you've got to take both of these benchmarks with a pinch of salt, but you can see that with the setup, with the radiator mounted on the side and those other NZXT fans, I was getting 97 degrees C maximum on the package and quite hot throughout. But this is pushing that CPU to the maximum because Cinebench is really punishing. Now, obviously, then I went about using the Corsair H150i Elite Caplix and Corsair's AF120 RGB Elite fans. There's actually more fans in the case now than there was with the NZXT setup, so it's worth noting that. You'll also notice I've only got a 3060 GPU in here instead, because I had to send back the 4080 sadly to Zotac because it was only a review unit, so I don't get to keep all the things. And then obviously slightly different setup to the standard with this H150i because it doesn't come with AF120 RGB Elites. And I also had to use new thermal pastes. So I'm using Thermal Grizzly rather than the standard pre-applied paste that come with the Kraken. I'm noting all this because this isn't a fair test, so I want you to take that with a pinch of salt when you look at these results, and you'll see. Obviously, also my thermal paste will upset a lot of people, and I've done that on purpose because I want to demonstrate that this actually gets better cooling performance with that thermal paste setup than with pre-applied thermal paste. So take that, all the commenters that will say this is wrong, because actually a good spread of thermal paste across the entire thing, as long as there's not too much, will give you a good end result. But what you'll see is obviously now I've got 320mm fans on the bottom. I've got more fans total in the case, but I ran the same test. So I'm recording with OBS the whole time and running Cinebench through multiple passes, and it's basically the same setup, same test. And this is the results that you'll see of it. Now it actually runs a bit cooler than before. We're now looking at 91 degrees maximum on the package and throughout the cores, so it is still pretty hot. However, I will note that it did actually end up getting a lower score in Cinebench, so that's an interesting point. The setup here actually runs cooler, but not as well in terms of the scores, so there's something to bear in mind. But hopefully this has been an interesting insight into the case, the setup options, and the things you can do with it. Drop me a comment and subscribe if you haven't already. Thumbs up, and maybe head over to Discord to get involved with the chat. Thanks for watching.